Wednesday, December 28th, 2022, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Andy Schectman. He's the president of Miles Franklin. Andy, welcome back to the channel.
Mario, it's so good to be here, buddy, and happy holidays to you and everyone out there. I'm such a big fan of everything that you do. It's just an honor to be here, and thanks for having me, my friend.
Oh, you're welcome, and thanks for coming on, and happy holidays to you and your family as well. And hopefully you have a good game of golf to
Yeah,
too.
yeah. I'm fortunate enough,
Yeah.
coming from Minnesota, spending 50 years up in the north. It's a treat to be able to say at the end of December I'm going to play golf this afternoon. So thanks for being so accommodative with the schedule, allowing me to sneak out and play a little bit of golf.
No problem. And we were speaking prior to the interview about the change from like a unipolar world where the dollar and the petrodollar are dominant to a multipolar world. And we saw, well, we've been seeing this for the last few years. I've covered it for the last 5 years, how China started its own gold and commodities exchange in Shanghai, this oil exchange where you can sell oil for and get renminbis, and then also change the renminbi to gold. And this year as well, Putin is talking about the new BRICS currency. And I think also the most important event, I think, and people look back at it almost like the creation of a petrodollar in the 70s, was when President Xi went to Saudi Arabia in the beginning of December. And maybe you could talk to the viewers how important this will be, not just for those countries out there, but for Americans and Europeans, and how that will impact their pocketbooks going forward.
Yeah, Mario, one of the reasons I gravitated to you year and a half, 2 years ago, was that there were very few of us talking about about the fact that this is no longer a world that will be dominated by the U.S. and by the petrodollar, and the things that had been happening over the last several years, this race that is now underway, that I believe will determine the shape of things to come for many generations. And it's all happening within the BRICS framework and the Belt Road Initiative and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and all of these European neighbors, along with Russia and the Asian continent, and the groups that are joining together in a win-win project of economic cooperation. All of it is void of the U.S. participation. And I think, especially when you talk about now it being inclusive of Saudi Arabia, who are purposely separating from the West, looking to, I guess you could say, all of these countries are looking to forge forward with their own economy. And I think it's important to mention that they have all of the oil and the productive capacity and the gold and the commodities that we will need, as Zoltan Pozsar talks about. We were mentioning his name offline, that we are entering Bretton Woods 3, a system dominated by commodities rather than by debt instruments. But look, what we were talking about was how Wall Street was focusing on things here at home rather than looking abroad. And I think that's a big mistake. I think I've been saying for a year and a half now that what the Federal Reserve is doing is a sideshow, because what is unfolding across the globe will determine the shape of things to come, not only this year, but for a very, very long time. Now, you mentioned several things in your opening. You talked about the Shanghai Gold Exchange. This is a gold exchange that has delivered many, many, many times more ounces of gold than the COMEX market has, which has been delivering, a tremendous amount in relative terms compared to what it always did, that being the COMEX. But one of the reasons the Shanghai Gold Exchange delivers so much gold is that this is how many of the countries like Iran sidestep US sanctions, or Russia, because as you mentioned, they buy oil for their Petroyuan bond. And that bond denominated in yuan is really not what these folks want to hold. They want to hold gold. And so the Petroyuan bond is immediately convertible into gold off the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And so what these folks will do, these countries, is they'll sell their oil to China for the Petroyuan bond, just like Nigeria is doing right now, and just like Saudi Arabia is doing. And they'll have the ability to convert that into gold and take delivery right off of the exchange. This is a massive deal, a massive shift. But I think, look, what is not being focused on enough is the US sanctions, in my opinion, have lit a fuse of de-dollarization. And I think it's sending a signal to other countries to start looking elsewhere, because the US could simply make any country's currency useless without notice, and they've proven that. And I think this has fueled a continued and expedited plan for the new BRICS currency, as the Russian finance minister has told us, that will be pegged to a basket of local currencies, that being the countries part of the BRICS, and commodities. And when we look at this not being a unipolar world anymore, let's just talk about some of the things that we saw happen this year. We saw Russia making deals involving combination of oil and gold and other commodities. We've seen India hoard more gold and silver than they have in decades, if not ever, in terms of yearly acquisition. Over 300 million ounces of silver this year they will import, and they're developing their own payment system, just like the SWIFT system, just like China did with their CIP system, the cross interbank payment system. All of these countries are hoarding commodities. They're building infrastructure to sidestep the US hegemony, to sidestep the ability of the West to sanction. You have the United Arab Emirates, who recently joined the BRICS Bank, and now they've expressed their intentions to joining BRICS. We've seen Saudi Arabia secure its position, as you mentioned, with China, or China secure its position with Saudi Arabia, with Xi Jinping visiting Saudi Arabia and them rolling out the red carpet when they snubbed President Biden. But it's not just Saudi Arabia. They've also signed a 27-year gas supply contract with Qatar. We've seen China offer South America and Africa massive infrastructure programs and capital investment in exchange for trade in yuan and royalties, and eliminating the need for China to compete in dollars. So it goes on and on and on. We've seen the opening of the international north-south transportation corridor, which will provide connectivity in the Middle East between Iran and Russia. We've seen 148 countries sign on to the Belt Road Initiative, which is the largest infrastructure project in human history. You see all of these things happening. All of these countries, like Turkey, who has traditionally been our ally, purchased more gold in the first half of the year than any country on the planet. And they too have not only expressed not using dollars in trade with countries like Russia, but they're joining BRICS too. So for Wall Street to ignore what is happening with what represents, Mario, north of 80% of human population forming a coalition against the West, is completely naive and ludicrous. And the things that we are focusing on are a sideshow, and that is the inept Federal Reserve and the options that they have in front of them, whether it be death by hyperinflation or death by depression. We know what they're going to choose. We know that they're going to pivot at some point. We know that they're going to choose inflation, and a country that is supposedly getting tough on inflation enacts a $1.75 nauseating $1 trillion omnibus bill, where you see things in this bill like $410 million towards border security with Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Tunisia, and Oman, but not a penny towards the US. Whatever they're doing, it's only accelerating the demise of the dollar as the central currency of the world, and incentivizing the rest of these countries around the world to form this coalition. So yes, I think Zoltan Pozsar is dead on. And I've been saying this for well over a year, that the real focus needs to be on what is happening with the BRICS nations, with China, with Russia, with India, with South Africa, with Saudi Arabia, with all of the countries that are joining this endeavor. And that, you see, when the dollar gets forsaken as the singular world reserve currency, when the dollar gets dumped and the rest of the world is looking for alternatives, this is when you will see things that will very, very quickly underscore what we're talking about. When inflation roars and interest rates peak, and I don't think we've seen anything yet. And certainly focusing on the inept Federal Reserve is looking at it's classic misdirection. It's looking at the rustling leaves instead of seeing the forest.
Yeah, and you talk about Zoltan. I just received this today from a friend, and this is from yesterday. His latest newsletter. He doesn't call it like research for financial advice, and he talks about what we've just been talking about: the BRICS, China, Russia, the Gulf Council countries, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, and UAE, and all those countries, and plus West Africa, North Africa, Latin America, Venezuela. So he's basically saying that China, Russia, he calls the BRICS here, as you can see, the G7 of the East, and he thinks it's expanding as well. They're going to control like almost 100% of all the oil reserves, and yeah, that's going to make things a lot more difficult for the West. And China apparently is getting like discount deals on all this. And when the U.S. Set up the petrodollar system, or like when he talks about Roosevelt meeting the king back in 1945, King Abdulaziz, he says it was just like a simple deal. We'll provide you liquidity from your oil, and we'll defend you as well. You use dollars. But now China is going a step further. It's not just providing selling for you one, but they're providing what he talks about, like a downstream infrastructure projects, and basically trying to improve. They're treating these countries like they deserve, like not just a place to get their oil from. And they will be able to, let's say, with renminbi or yuan reserves, they'll be able to like buy technology from China. So it's a huge move. And this is what he says here about, let's have a look here. He talks about the inflation and how Wall Street, here we go. Inflation traders should be paranoid, not complacent, as Andy Grove said. Only the paranoid survive. But when I asked a small group of inflation traders over dinner in London this summer about how the market comes up with 5-year forward, 5-year break-evens, I did not sense any degree of paranoia in their answer. There is no top-down or bottom-up work that we do to come up with our estimates. We take central banks' inflation targets as a given, and the rest liquidity. So he's saying here that basically they're not looking into geopolitics, and that's going to be a big mistake. So
it's the biggest mistake. That's not even close. It is absolutely the largest mistake. And when you look at what what the Crown Prince said, he said, we look to the US for security. We look to China as our most relevant partner in trading oil, not only this year, but for the next 50 years. And so why would Saudi Arabia and or OPEC, keep in mind, all 13 OPEC member countries are on the Belt Road Initiative. Why would they want to have anything to do with the West, who is openly going green, when 80% of the world that comprises this coalition? And you're right, they're going there not only to say, hey, we'll protect you, but how about this? We'll build your infrastructure. When you look at the Belt Road Initiative, it is connecting 45% of global GDP before industrialization. They're going to industrialize all of this this massive swath of land in Africa and in South America. They are going to create infrastructure, and for that, they will receive royalties. So, I mean, that is a genius model. And not only that, when you talk about all of these countries forming a union, their military might is much stronger than ours, as is their GDP. To not focus on this, to ignore this, is to make a massive, massive mistake. And I think Zoltan is exactly right. As it is right now, 60% of the world's population is either in or is going to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This isn't even part of the Belt Road Initiative or the BRICS nations. They are bringing the world together under this type of scenario where, hey, we will build infrastructure, we will provide support, we will do all of these things. It's the rallying against the Western hypocrisy and hegemony that is bringing everyone to the table. But what is the glue that makes it work is the pegging of commodities to a new system, as Zoltan Poser calls it, a Bretton Woods III system that will be dominated by commodities. And look, I think that when you saw Xi go to Saudi Arabia, he has traveled maybe only one time since COVID. There's no question that this is to seal a deal for a BRICS alliance. And I think that is the beginning of the end of the petrodollar. And if I had to guess, you will see a new BRICS gold-backed reserve currency at some point in the very near future. That's my guess. Yeah. Whether it be completely gold or whether it be a basket of other commodities, I guess remains to be seen. But that's exactly how you beat the West without throwing a punch. You just simply offer an alternative that is backed by real things. And the best way to show the world the veracity of this would be to use the technology of the new Chinese digital yuan, which is about 4 or 5 years old, which has had tremendous success, already north of 25 billion in successful trade, and back it for the whole world to see. Everyone's pledge of all the commodities pegged to the system for the whole world to see on a distributed ledger. I think there's no question that this is the focal point. Looking at what Fed Chairman Powell will do is just nothing but a sideshow.
Yeah, I think Zoltan talks about this, and that they're already using this CBDC to exchange currency between, I think, is it Russia, one of the Middle Eastern countries?
Yeah, so that you're talking the United Arab Emirates, China, and I think it was Shanghai. This is what is called the M Bridge. The M Bridge.
Yeah, he's talking about the M Bridge here. Yeah, they're already doing it.
The M Bridge is, and I think they're trying to do it here in the United States. I want to say it's called Project Cedar, something like that, where they are. What M Bridge and Project Cedar is the ability to to trade central bank digital currencies cross-border. Where M-Bridge differentiates from the Western version is that M-Bridge sidesteps the Western intermediary banks. There is no SWIFT system involved, whereas
you can overcome the sanctions with that.
That's exactly right. And why wouldn't you? I mean, why wouldn't you if you are all of these countries? It makes perfect sense. And that's why I wonder sometimes either our administration is completely idiotic or this was they're trying to find a villain, and they did it purposely. They know that $150 trillion in funded and unfunded liabilities, mostly accumulated at the lowest interest rates in human history, can't be paid back. So now you have a villain. I hope I'm wrong, but if something like this were to fully accentuate, if these countries came out and said, you know what, it's time for us to stand on our own feet. And by the way, Saudi Arabia and all of OPEC, who is on the Belt Road Initiative, all 13 countries have decided to offer oil only in the new BRICS currency. Bang, it's over. Because all of the countries, as you mentioned, President Roosevelt going there after World War II, or, to go there and say, hey, we'll protect you. Look, the whole world had dollars at this point because of the Bretton Woods system. It made sense for the U.S. to be the petrodollar. They were everywhere. We were the engine of industry and growth and safety, and we were an ocean away, and made great sense. but I think we have exhausted the good graces of our foreign creditors. I think we are at the end of that rope. And if we lose the Petro Reserve status, it's a major deal because every country on the planet has had to own dollars to buy oil for the past 50 years. And if all of a sudden there becomes an alternative, one that is embraced by over 3/4 of human population, I think it's going to be a very long, dark winter, so to speak,
Oh
in the
yeah,
West as we deal with the ramifications of that.
yeah, and I guess there is one guy on Wall Street, Zoltan, who sees it. He calls it now in his piece from yesterday. That meeting in Saudi Arabia, he said that marks the dawn of the Petroyuan, as you see here, and I think that's huge because it will mean all these countries that have had to keep dollar reserves and then put them into treasuries. That's all going to change, and it's not going to be overnight, but it's not going to
Well,
get.
think about that, Mario. I mean, not only are they have they chosen to inflate away the dollar, but you're right. That was always part of the deal. You'll take the proceeds, you'll buy treasuries, and you'll make more on the deal, and that helps us. Well, why would anyone in the right mind buy long treasuries, a 10-year, 30-year, when it's below the rate of inflation, and that we, like every government before us, will choose inflation over austerity. What made that deal good for the world has come to an end. And I think that that's the part that the brightest and the smartest are ignoring. It's also something that I find to be very troubling, that the things that are so important are ignored by the mainstream. And you have to watch Monaco 64 and you have to listen to me and listen to other people on alternative media to find a semblance of truth. And what that tells me is that most of the people in the West are going to be caught completely off guard. So, in the West, I don't know what it's like in the UK, but here in the United States, there's a 60-40 mantra where 60% of your assets are in stocks, 40 in bonds. This is what not only the average person who has a money manager has, but the pension funds, the insurance companies, all of these people, the majority of the people in this country. Rick Rule, my friend, often talks about, I know you know Rick, and he often talks about 0.5% allocation in metals across the entire financial matrix in the United States. In other words, no one owns any. Everyone is fully invested in stocks and bonds and real estate, which are all inversely correlated to a spike in interest rates. And that's exactly what would happen if the dollar were dumped. And no one looks at the possibility of this happening when you see a massive coalition of countries growing by the day. When I started talking about this stuff in 2020, mostly is when I really started to talk about it. You would see it something every week or two or three or four, one thing. Now every day, every day, every day, every day. It's a new arrangement, a new relationship, a new I'm joining BRICS, a new I'm joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I mean, it's every single day there's something new to talk about. This is accelerating, and yet the people here are fast asleep. But when that happens, it will catch everyone off guard because there's not a peep of it, short of a guy like yourself or Zoltan or other people talking about it, which are very few and far between.
Yeah, and sometimes you do hear it from the mainstream media, like Bloomberg or Reuters or CNBC, but they disparage you. They say, "Oh, it's only like Uzbekistan." They think, they disrespect all these countries. But when they're all ganging up together, it makes a huge difference. And that 0.5% is that just physical gold and silver, or also the mining sector and everything?
I think it's the entire sector. The way he says it, almost verbatim, is that the asset allocation in the United States from Joe Sixpack to the Harvard Endowment Fund is 1/2%.
Yeah, I would say it's the
and
same.
I believe that.
Yeah, and the same here, and people focus a lot here on stocks, bonds, and real estate, especially. So I think 2022 has been a tough year for the 60-40 crowd. And we're actually seeing, even though a lot of people expected gold and silver to do really well because we have inflation, if you look at silver, it's slightly up this year now, and gold is it was about unchanged yesterday, but it's come off a bit. So how do you see things going forward, considering what's happening to the unipolar world, that world is dissolving and we're getting a new world? And how has that been impacting your business, like in the last year and a half or so?
Well, Mario, I'm a big fan of the book, The Art of War. I gave a whole series of presentations on it for a few years on the concept of misdirection. This is a book written in the 5th century BC by a Chinese military strategist named Sun Tzu. For those who haven't read it, this is a very important book, and it's widely taught around the world in most major business schools on corporate hierarchy, in most major law schools on formulating arguments. It's mandatory reading at the CIA and at West Point. It's taught to most Japanese business executives. Probably the most famous American football coach here in the United States, Bill Belichick, reads it on formulating game theory. It's how to beat an opponent without throwing a punch. It's classic misdirection. And when you think about how much that is used, at least in our world, it all begins to resonate. I'll give you an example. Now, I could say to you that the price of silver has been controlled and kept too low for too long, and it has distorted the real supply-demand fundamentals. It's created a global physical shortage. But if you were just looking at the price, you'd say, BS. I don't believe that. That's not true. Look at the price. India in 2021 imported 4,500 tons. This year, they are approaching 8,000 tons of silver. That's a 78% increase. Their expectations are to import over 300 million ounces. Well, why isn't the price going to the moon? It is because of the distortions and the misdirection that has been created by suppressing the paper price, because it means a whole lot more to see gold and silver accentuate. They are the canary in the mine shaft against the Western system. But what is betraying, Mario, what is betraying the price? No, and gold, why isn't gold going up? Why isn't gold going up in the midst of 40-year high inflation and chaos and war and all of this? Well, this is exactly the point. We are seeing a betrayal of the rhetoric and of the price action by the biggest money in the world, drawing down the physical supplies from the top on down. When you see silver on the London Metals Exchange at the lowest level in inventories they've ever had since they started keeping records on a 140-year-old exchange, that says something to me. When you see COMEX, the registered category, those are the bars that are available for immediate delivery, being drawn down nearly 80% since February 2021 to 33 million ounces backing the whole system, that says something to me. When India will import 10 times that amount this year. So the world, the big money, is using the misdirection of price and rhetoric to reposition. When you see the massive amount of gold acquisition by the central banks of the world, when you see 400 metric tons of gold delivered out of the West in the third quarter, nearly double the biggest quarterly accumulation by the banks ever, just almost double. When you see it approaching over 700 tons delivered for the year, which we haven't seen that much delivered to the central banks since 1967. So what we're seeing is the biggest money in the world is taking advantage of price and rhetoric to de-dollarize, to accumulate copious amounts of precious metals. And from the top on down, from the LME, from the COMEX, backdooring out of the ETFs, this to me betrays everything, betrays the rhetoric, betrays the price. Now, how does that affect here in the West? For the past 3 years, getting product has been next to impossible. It has been the single biggest challenge of my career, where it used to be a no-brainer, and for the last 3 years, it's become incredibly difficult. Now, something very interesting has happened, and I don't know quite how to explain it, and I'm almost at a loss. And that is, over the past month, the premiums have collapsed. Now, the only thing that I could say about that, Mario, is that at least in terms of retail physical premium here in the US. Now, I don't know how it is where you are. We've talked about this before, where premiums were through the roof, and they have been for 3 years. The only thing that makes sense to me is that this year, this holiday season, this happened almost straight up with about a week before Thanksgiving, everything collapsed across the whole industry. Demand just fell. And that's with gold and silver having a really great, run recently. But I think people have been so bottled up for the past few years that the ability to travel, to enjoy the holidays, to see family, to get out and do things without the COVID restrictions, has really made people unplug. I know it. I have really tried hard to unplug. We had our whole family here, both sides, my wife and I. Most of them wouldn't come the last 2 years to our home because of travel with COVID and all of the gathering together in large groups. I think that has a lot to do with it. People getting out and trying to live life. And at the same time, you have the 2023 allocations. So when the mints issue their new allocations, the large distributors have obligations to take large swaths of them. So basically what has happened as the business has slowed down this year, as it has allowed people to catch up, and the new allocations have come out, we've seen, in my opinion, the best premium, the best opportunity to buy metals that I've seen really since February 2020. Now, is this going to stick? I don't think so. I think this is a sweet spot. When I look at the big inventories on the large wholesalers, there is product available, but all of it says limited, 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 limited. Some of it says sold out already. Most of the third quarter, everything was sold out. Premiums were through the roof. They've come down a lot. And I would suspect it would take one event, some event, whatever that may be, and we go right back to not being able to get product again. Because remember, 0.5% allocation. And for the last 3 years, it's been nearly impossible. What happens if that becomes 5%? Just a 5% allocation. That's a tenfold increase in demand. It's over. Won't happen. And I've been out there saying for the last 2 years that the market will ultimately identify itself by the inability for most of us to source product. And that the biggest reason I say that is that the elephant hasn't woken up yet. The pimple on the elephant's ass, you and I and everyone else who listens to our podcast, well, we've all woken up, no question about it. But the elephant hasn't. When the elephant turns around to see what's bothering him on his rear end so much and says, oh my God, the world has dumped dollars because they're all gravitating towards a new system. 80% of the world is moving to a new system backed by commodities, and not by the Western hypocrisy and a system based upon the ability for governments to create wealth out of thin air, which is immoral at best. It's all going to change like that. And so, yeah, it's a very unusual time. You know the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. In the past 4 weeks, premiums have been halved and nothing has changed. So do I see this being a long-term trend? Absolutely not. But I honest to God believe it is the best time to buy metal, period, that I have seen in almost 3 years.
And I guess they have halved as well because silver, for example, has gone from around 18 to like 24. So that's a pretty big move. So that probably got a few people to sell as well. And are the premiums still relatively high, let's say, compared to pre-2020, even though they have dropped a lot?
Yeah, they're roughly double, except on the Silver Eagle, which is still 3 times what it always was.
So,
and I would argue that I haven't seen anyone sell anything. You would think, I think the people the traders, they may be buying and selling GLD or SLD or PHYS or PSLD, any of these ETFs that allow them to go in and out. But people selling physical metal represents a very small portion of our business, maybe less than 1%, because the higher the price goes in this environment only reinforces people's skepticism of the system, only reinforces their concern of what's happening and what's coming. And so to go back into fiat is really counter to what most people are thinking in the physical world. I know you haven't sold, I don't know this, but I'm guessing you haven't sold any of your silver just because the price went up. In fact, if I called my clients and said, silver's at $40, you should sell right now, they'd laugh at me. Most of them would. Now, there will come a time from silver to gold when the ratio gets more in line, but to go back into dollars is something most people wouldn't do. Look, the bottom line is simply this. for whatever reason, demand fell off in November. I really, honest to God, believe it has to do with people just unwinding. And if you think about the stress that has been on all of us for the last 2.5 years in every way, even little things like going to a grocery store, and for a good part of the last 2 years, the stress that we've all learned to live with, and to see that kind of evaporate into the ether, I think people have just got out and unplugged and traveled and been with family and shut off their computer screen. Does that have a profound effect? Well, I'll tell you this, in the United States, it has. I'm friends with many of the owners of precious metals companies and the big wholesalers, and they're all saying the same thing. It's like someone absolutely turned off the switch. It's weird how it can happen that way in this market. And the only thing that makes sense to me is that people's mental health is more important than anything. And this, for me anyway, this holiday season has been a respite. And I think my mind is in a better place as a result of it. I think a lot of people feel that way. And that's the only thing that makes sense to me, because not a damn thing is changing in this world. In fact, it's getting scarier by the day. That is, if you're paying attention.
Yeah, I agree with you, because my wife and I, we've had a nice year. We've traveled quite a bit, more than we used to, even prior to 2020, because like you said, it's been a tough 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Things have kind of calmed down, and it feels like there's a window there for you to just enjoy life, because you never know what the next crisis is going to be. So yeah,
it's like being on a deserted island and then coming home and going into a pizza joint. It's like you're going to chow that pizza and maybe order 6 more, and then on the way home stop at McDonald's for a Big Mac, because that's kind of what it's like. You're so bottled up and into an environment that none of us thought we'd ever live through. A pandemic, come on.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden it's over, just like that. It's over, however the hell that happened. And I think the holidays were a signal for people that have been in the rat race too, trying to keep up for the last couple of years, just to let go and unplug. So I would think that the first quarter 2023 will bring with it a lot of very interesting things. But the one thing that I don't know when it's going to happen, but we've been told that the BRICS are going to issue a new reserve currency, and we assume it will be pegged to commodities, like the Russian finance minister said. When that happens, when they plan on releasing that, because when that happens, everything that we've been talking about here in a very short order will start to take shape, I think, in a very, very, very short order. And I think that's really the point here. I think that article that Zoltan, look, I've been saying his name for a long time now. It started in 2019 when he was still, I believe, with the New York Fed, talking about the repo market. And the guy knows what he's talking about, and he looks at the world in a very articulate way, in a way that most people don't. And I would encourage people to get this article, to research Zoltan. Look what he's talking about. He was talking a few weeks ago about the potential for Russia to offer their oil only for gold, and instead of the 1 gram, which would roughly work out to $60 an ounce for President Biden to refuel the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which he has dwindled to 40-year lows, to offer 2 barrels of oil for a gram of gold. And what that would do for the gold price immediately would double it in the international market. What would that do for silver? Quadruple it, maybe. So the point of it is simply this, that things are changing rapidly. And if we were going to encapsulate what we've been talking about, it's what you and I have been focusing on for a very long time. And that is, this group of people around the world are shaping our new reality. And I think it will shape, just like the Prince of Saudi Arabia said, China is our primary partner for this year and the next 50. I would argue what that really means is that, look, the US has been their focus for the last 50. That has been why we've had the petro reserve status for the last 50. We are seeing an end of the petrodollar. We are seeing an end of the US dollar dominance. And look, no one wants to go to war and start lobbing weapons. The way to win the battle is to do it in a gentlemanly way, and that is to offer the rest of the world a better alternative. And I think that's where we're heading. And People don't get this. If they're not contrarians, they're going to be a victim when this happens. And so owning precious metals, it's wealth. It's been wealth for 5,000 years. It has outlived every two world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, and every pandemic. If you own enough of it, you'll be wealthy, but you don't buy it to get wealthy. You buy it because of what is happening over there. They're all joining together. And by the way, they are the countries that are accumulating all of the gold. I wanted to bring up one thing that I find really, really interesting. You know, the countries that have either joined BRICS or are on the list of those to join shortly, they have expressed interest in joining BRICS. It's very interesting when you take a look at the amount of gold that they own as a percentage of their reserves. Check this out. Venezuela, 82%. Uzbekistan, 65%. Kazakhstan, 63%. Bolivia, 55%. Belarus, 40%. Turkey, 29%. Pakistan, 29%. Kyrgyzstan, 22%. All of these countries are loading up on gold, and they represent a minimum of 22% of their reserves, some of them as high as 80%. What does that tell you? It tells you all of these countries are breaking away from the West, and they are using something stable like gold to allow them to join a system where you will not be part of the system just by saying I'm going to join. Everyone will have an equal say at the table based upon what they pledge to the system. And I think that's what makes it work. That's the glue that makes it work. What gets everyone to the table is what's happening here and the nonsense that's happened here for a very long time, and the distortions that we've created by mismanaging greatly through ridiculous monetary policy, the world reserve currency. Mario, you couldn't be more right on with everything you talk about. And this is why I don't miss anything you talk about. And I hope people understand that you're giving them information that I believe is once in a generationally important.
No, thank you very much. And just before we wrap up, maybe you could tell the viewers how they can get in touch with you now that we've had an affiliation for the last few months, if they want to do what the BRICS countries are doing and safeguard their wealth.
Yeah, so, sending silver and gold to the UK and to Europe is very difficult, unfortunately. But here in the United States, we're honored to work with your listeners. And, I know a lot of people here in the West do follow you. I have to tell you and everyone out there, it's been a horribly embarrassing experience for me. I've been telling people since August that our website is nearly done. We had to get new developers midstream. They just basically disappeared. And here in the States, every single state in the United States has different, there's about 10 or 12 states that charge taxes on precious metals. A lot of them are disappearing. And every county in those states, there might be 100 counties in a state, they all have different tax structures. And the software integration now is the last piece. We're almost done. We're about 99% done. We're going to issue a new website that will allow people to go to it with your affiliate link and buy online. In the meantime, what I would ask people to do, and again, I'm so sorry it's taken so long. We're this close. It's been really the most difficult, awful, nauseating experience of my career trying to get a new website up. Our current website, milesfranklin.com, does not list prices. It will, the new one will. But in the meantime, send us an email at info@milesfranklin. Put Mineco64 in the subject line, or Mario sent me. We will make sure your listeners get the best price in America, get personalized service. We've never had a customer complaint in 33 years. We've done nearly $8 billion in sales without one. We are one of only 27 U.S. Mint authorized resellers, and we are licensed and bonded in the state of Minnesota. Even though I live in Florida, my corporation is located in Minneapolis. It is the only state in America that mandates licensing and bonding in what is a North American unregulated industry. So we hold ourselves to a much higher standard, not only as a company, but in having the honor to work with someone of your esteem and caliber. And it is a great honor. And I personally will make sure that anyone who contacts us mentions that Mario or Mineco64 sent us, that they will be given the rock star treatment and the best prices in the country. And I would also like to express, I know we haven't talked online here, but my deep sympathies and condolences for the missing puppy on the couch. You have my heartfelt sympathy. I went through the same thing earlier in 2022, and I know that all of us here watching this feel the same way. So we're sorry to see Billy not with you here.
Well, thank you very much. And Andy, I wish you a happy new year and a prosperous new year. And also, yeah, hope to speak to you soon.
Absolutely, Mario. I'm always here when you want to chat, and hopefully you get stateside and you and I can tee it up here in Florida one of these days. But in the meantime, I wish you, your family, and everyone out there a very happy, healthy, prosperous new year. And Mario, let's do it again after the new year. I'll look forward to picking up with you and everyone else where we left off.
Great. Thank you.